There's an old country road leads to a river, an old wooden fence surrounds all the sinners who stand by their graves, wondering what they'd done wrong. There's a train whistle blowing across a fiery desert in search for the new land. The treacherous weather is headed for the mountain to preach a brand new way. And it's full of politicians, bakers and lawyers, a fast-talking man been armed to destroy us and keep us from the truth. Consume, consume, consume. Lies, lies. Don't believe them. Don't believe them. And westward they head, ravaging the villages, they burn all the dead. Their world is for the privileged, and you're not one of them. You're just a number. So they came up with races, borders and fences, and job occupations, and classifications. Their aim to conquer, divide, divide, divide. Lies, lies. Don't believe them. Don't believe them. Don't believe them. Ooh. Don't believe them. Ooh. Don't believe them. Ooh. Don't believe them. We're just one race, one color, one number. We're just one man, one father, one mother. We must unite before they take our lives.
I'm a native Coloradoan. I was born in the San Luis Valley. My family goes back several generations. I was raised a Roman Catholic. At age 14, I went to a seminary in Washington, D.C. I was there during Martin Luther's civil rights demonstrations in 1963. Also was there during President Kennedy's assassination. So I've always kind of had a sense of that my country was important, that I was a part of it. And after I decided not to become a priest and finish high school, I decided that I would join the military as a patriot.
You were not drafted?
No, volunteer. I think I enlisted because I really believe in, at that time I really believed in patriotic duty. That this was my country, and someone convinced me that our values and freedoms were being challenged, and not knowing the history and the background of that, I willfully joined and volunteered for the military. I was scheduled to go to Vietnam, assigned to the 101st Airborne in December of 1968. When I got orders that I was selected to attend airdrop and supply school. It was a voluntary basis, and it's kind of funny because I turned it down. Because at that point I said I trained to be an airborne ranger, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam, and I wanted to go with my unit. And before I had to turn in the paperwork, I was visited by a sergeant out of the blue. And the sergeant had just recently come back from Vietnam, and he basically just said he was surprised that I would turn down that opportunity. And he told me that it was an opportunity, and that that I should look at it as a godsend, and that I would probably get to Vietnam soon enough. But knowing my age and my experience, he says, you have no idea what the war's like. And every day you could stay away from it, you should be thankful for that day. So the next morning when I woke up, I went in and told my captain I accepted the training. And so I went off to Fort Lee, Virginia, which is outside of Washington, D.C., and I trained for 3 months. And then I was assigned to Vietnam in July of 1968. Actually, I should have said, let me correct myself, I said that I graduated from jump school in December of 68, and I was going to go to Vietnam. Actually, it was 67 that I graduated from jump school and was going to go. So I would have been in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive in 1968, which was the biggest casualty day in the history of the Vietnam War. Thousands of people lost their lives on both sides. And somehow or another, because I chose to go to this other training, I missed it. My father was a baker, and I'd been to the seminary, and I'd always worked my whole life. I was used to working. I was used to getting up early. I was very athletic, so the strain and the struggle of the military life was actually kind of fun. It was like going to camp, you know, and I was always competing with the other military guys, and it was so cool to be able to run faster, throw faster, shoot straighter than they did, and it was almost like a game, really. And I kind of enjoyed it. I learned early, though, to keep to myself, not get too friendly with people, not be outspoken, because people in the military come from so many diverse backgrounds. You got to be careful what you say, because you can offend somebody without knowing you're offending them. So I learned that very quickly, and so, yeah, right off the bat, the military life taught me to be disciplined and create a sense of honor or responsibility. After I first got there, everything moved so fast. I mean, go here, go do this, go do that, better do this. So you're always getting advice of what to do. And basically you're told not to talk. Just listen and pay attention, observe. And then when you learn the ropes, then you can start talking and thinking out loud. But until you learn the ropes, just do your job. Don't volunteer for anything. And so you have to learn how to just, you almost feel like you're a little child again, and your parents are leading you through a mall, and you just got to go where they lead you, and until you learn to think for yourself. So yeah, that first initiation takes probably 3, 4, 5 months to actually start feeling comfortable.
Yeah. What were your duties during those first months?
Well, it was mixed. Sometimes we would go out on patrol, which required us to spend, several nights out in the jungles, walking around in the jungles. Other times I would spend back in the rear. We called it the rear. It would be a fire base, and there I would pull guard duty, KP. And then other times I worked on my secondary MOS, which was the airdrop and supply. So we would pack, large airdrops and push them out of planes and drop them where they needed them and stuff like that. Or everyone's seen the big Chinook helicopters, the double-bladed Chinooks. One of my jobs was to sling up loads, and these ships would come down, and I'd hook a hook to the winch, and they would fly those out. They were called sorties. I spent most of my time doing that kind of work, working at the helipads, loading supplies. I made two combat jumps in Vietnam with full gear, And it didn't make sense because I said, why are we parachuting into a jungle? But we made it work. I wasn't too happy about it, I'll tell you the truth, though. When they handed me that parachute and told me I was going to jump out of a perfectly good plane over the jungle, I thought, what are we doing?
Yeah.
This don't make sense. But it was a training exercise, they told us. If I didn't have any work for the next day or two, I would catch a convoy and I'd go into the villages. And since I was there almost 2 years, I made friends. And I would go and I would spend a day or two with these. It would just be like going to visit some relatives somewhere, except they'd be all Vietnamese.
Yeah.
And most of the adults didn't speak any English, but they always had a child that would do all the interpreting. And so I would have conversations with the grandparents, with the parents. And it always took a while before they'd even talk to you, because basically they didn't trust you.
Yeah.
The kids did. They trusted you because, well, you were a meal ticket. You know, you were going to buy something from them. You were going to buy this, and you know. But as I got to know families, when I'd go visit them, I'd always take food. I would take steaks and eggs and bread and stuff, and then they would cook me a meal and treat me like I was, you know, an honored guest. And we got to talk to them. And one of the things that they told me that really struck a chord was how, first of all, they didn't understand what was going on with the war. They didn't understand what's this all about. And secondly, they said it doesn't matter which way we turn, we're always pissing somebody off. You have to remember, during the American invasion of Vietnam, we had the American Army, we had the Viet Cong, who were sympathetic with the North Vietnamese Army. Then you had the South Vietnamese Army that were sympathetic with the Americans, of course. Then you had the Koreans. Then you had the Australians. And you had the French. And you had the English. You had all these little armies, the Canadians. And every time one of these units would move through a village, and I'm talking about any of them, the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, South Vietnamese, the different armies, they would accuse the villages of sympathizing with the last group that came through. And so then they would burn down the village or do something terrible. And it didn't matter what they did, the villagers could never appease everybody, because no matter what they did, they were going to piss somebody off. And they made that very clear to me, that it doesn't matter what we do, we're always doing something wrong. And all we want to do is live. Grow our rice, grow our gardens. It's such a beautiful country. They call it the green earth, Vietnam. The word they use, and when they explain it, that's what it means. It means the green earth. And I wish I would have known more of the history of Vietnam before I went over there, because they have a history that goes back thousands of years with the Buddhists and with the various sages and the medicine people. And you know, actually, when you start really getting into the Vietnamese spirituality, there's a strong comparisons with the Native Americans of this country. So, in a way, I began to see things different. And I went over to Vietnam basically innocent, full of idealistic ideas about what freedom means and peace, but I was very innocent and naive. But I knew my heart. So I pretty much abandoned the church and my idea about God. So when I got over to Vietnam, after about 18 months or 17 months, I found myself really depressed, because I'd seen so much death, so much pain, so much destruction. For example, flying in a helicopter, the land is so beautiful over there. It's just so beautiful. But for the first time, I noticed there were all these holes in the ground. I wondered, what are those holes? And then I realized they were bomb craters. And field after field, mile after mile, there was just dozens and dozens of bomb craters. I mean, we're talking 50, 100 meters wide. And now for the first time I realized this was someone's backyard, because I was getting to know some of the people. And I had this epiphany, I guess. I said, well, if foreigners came over to the San Luis Valley, where I was born in southern Colorado, and stopped dropping their bombs, how would the people react? And I couldn't help but empathize with the people. And that's when I began to realize that the war was wrong, and that what we were doing over there didn't make sense. And all I kept hearing about was all the conspiracies, how the South Vietnamese was a corrupt government, and that everybody were just, all these politicians were making money hand over fist, and it was the people that were suffering. So I began to see it from the political side. And it was not about freedom. It wasn't about saving a country. I mean, these people had been over there for thousands of years and had a civilization for thousands of years, and they kind of have worked these things out to, through the centuries. And here, this new country, this barely in infant stage, is going there and telling these people what to do and how to do it. It just didn't make sense to me anymore. Even though I didn't totally understand it, I knew it was wrong. And so I got really depressed. I thought, not only did I get depressed, I thought, my soul may be in jeopardy. My soul. And so one crazy night, I'm laying out in my bunker, and there's this huge storm. And it was so bad, I thought the storm was the end of the world. And I was feeling depressed, and I was afraid. I was feeling guilty, ashamed. Didn't know if I'd ever go home. And I cried. I gotta admit, I cried. I cried because I was confused. I didn't want to be a part of a world that was so crazy. And I realized that maybe I was a part of that craziness. And so in a way that night, I had this most powerful dream. And I'm sure if I would have been a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Taoist, I probably would have had a vision of one of those teachers. But since I was a Christian, I had a dream Jesus came to me. So I'm a person that believes that the Spirit is the same in all religions. There is no separate. We're just brainwashed to believe they're separate, but they're all the same. And as long as we think someone's different than us, that justifies our ability to go in and do something to them. And I was starting to wake up to that. But anyway, Jesus tells me in this dream, it's a wrong dream, but he basically tells me that I was too hard on myself. He says I was being too serious, that I still had a lot to remember. And that he said, and remember what I taught you, there's no death. And I woke up in the morning, and I'd forgotten the dream, and I had to go to work. And as I'm going to the helipad, that's where the helicopters come in, I was going to go to work. A soldier tapped me on the shoulder and introduced himself and said he was going home that day, back to the world. And he said, but before I go, I got to give you something. I says, what is it? He says, well, I don't know how you're going to take this, but I got to give it to you. And he hands me a little book about that big. And I notice it's the Bible. And I say, I don't want your Bible, you keep it. Because he told me that it kept him comfortable during his tour. And my memory of the Bible was dark. It's just all damnation and hellfire and brimstone, and everybody's a sinner and you're all going to hell, and God's going to, kill our enemies and all that stuff. I didn't want to hear that stuff. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't believe it, but I didn't understand it. But he says, you got to take it. The Spirit is guiding me to give this to you. And so finally I reached out and I grabbed it. And the moment I grabbed that book, the dream that I had had the night before came to me, really clear. You have a lot to remember. And I connected the two events, the dream and this guy coming up to me. And so I thanked him and wished him well. And so I start reading the Bible. Not from page to page. I just open it up and just read whatever. And found all these beautiful passages about not to worry about stuff, and we're all related, and the truth within is inside of us, it's not out there, and not to be fooled by outer appearances, and remember that you're a soul, and mortality is just temporary, and all these things, and all those things began to make sense to me. And I began to change. I wasn't depressed anymore. I wasn't fearful anymore. I'd go to work, and I would do my job the best I could, but I just had a happy demeanor. I was no longer a warrior. I'd become a pacifist. And it was really funny, and you might think this is strange or that I'm patting myself on the shoulder, but I'm not. Guys were starting to come up to me, guys that I didn't even know. And they'd say, "Would you pray with me?" And I'd say, "Why?" He says, "I don't know, there's just something about you, and I'm getting ready to go out on the mission today, and will you pray with me?" And we'd kneel down and we'd pray. One guy even asked me to baptize him. He said, "Will you baptize me?" I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, I'm going back to the world, and I want to be cleansed of all this war." And I says, "Who am I?" I mean, I was embarrassed, you know. But he said, "Please." And so I remembered the dream again. You have a lot to remember, you know. And I thought, well, maybe this is one of the things that I'm supposed to do. So yeah, spiritually, I began to change. I went from, like I said, a warrior, an innocent warrior, naive warrior, to realizing warrior doesn't mean you have to kill. Warrior means you're strong wherever you're at, and you do what needs to be done. And so my mind began to change. And so I would have to say, from a spiritual standpoint, I really grew spiritually. I found God again, if you will. But not the God that I was raised with in the Catholic Church. No offense to the Catholic Church. I mean, it's kind of like going to school, you know. Once you pass 6th grade, you know, and you're in high school, the 6th grade work should be easy for you. It should be kind of boring. Well, it's kind of the way I was with my spirituality. The Catholic Church was fine up to a point, but it couldn't help me get over that hurdle I wanted to get over, which was, we're all related. We're all the same. And so when I gave up the Catholic Church, I gave up God, but in Vietnam, I found God again. But I saw him from a whole different perspective. I saw him in the Vietnamese people. I even saw him in the enemies, because I realized those enemies that we call our enemies are parents. They probably have children at home waiting for them to come home. And I connected the dots. And I began to question, why are we here? Why are we doing this? And I didn't ever answer the question. All I knew, I was a changed person. Because they wanted me to re-up because I was a specialist. They offered me $10,000 to re-up for 3 more years. $10,000 in 1970 was a lot of money. I turned it down. I don't carry a weapon. Ever since I left Vietnam, I don't use guns. But when I used to rabbit hunt, and when I used to do those things when I was younger, where you have that gun, you just can't wait to shoot something. Because that's the spirit of the gun. In fact, when you're in the military, that's what you're brainwashed. The spirit of the weapon is to kill. The spirit of the bayonet is to kill. And you're brainwashed to believe that. You're an airborne ranger. You want to live a life of danger. You want to go to Vietnam, and you want to kill the Viet Cong. And then you hold up your bayonet, you know, and all this blood and this rage runs through you as you're convinced that you're going to destroy the enemy. And when you're 18, 19 years old, you buy into that stuff. Something one of my teachers told me that really helped me get well. He said, when you went over to Vietnam, you were innocent. You saw the world through rose-colored glasses. You were going over to be a hero, you know. And then you saw reality, what death and war and destruction looks like. And you came back and you weren't the same. But everybody wanted to treat you the same. They wanted you to just go on like nothing ever happened. but yet you had all this emotion just pushed so far down that you would never talk about it. No one wanted to talk about it. I mean, I don't know if you guys realize this, but a lot of Vietnam veterans, when they were getting off the plane, people used to line up, protesters, and they would spit on them. They would spit on them. They would call them baby killers, and they would call them killers and murderers. And you just can't imagine how that makes you feel. It makes you angry, but it also makes you feel like you were used. Once you send a soldier into war and you bring him back, the people that know what they're doing, they don't want to be anywhere near those people because they're a walking time bomb. And that's kind of how you feel after a while. And rather than take that to the negative, I've tried to take it to the positive, and which is mean I've tried to educate people about, you know, following the golden rule. You know, treat others as you want to be treated. You know, if you treat others like you want to be treated, there's no way you can go to war to hurt somebody, because you'll be hurting your brother or your sister or some innocent. You know? And we used to have this saying in Vietnam, when you were out in the jungle and you'd hear it in the middle of the night, attitude check, and you'd hear, fuck it. What are they going to do, send me to Vietnam?
Let's go right into it.
Oh yeah, we're still rolling. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Love yourself. It's all that you can do. Love yourself, and your pieces will come to you. Love yourself. It isn't hard to do. Oh, love yourself, and I'll love you too. Love yourself. It's all that you can do. Love yourself, and your pieces will come to you. Love yourself. It isn't hard to do. Oh, love yourself, and I'll love you too. Oh, love yourself. It's all that you can do. Love yourself,